so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with students. Um, I am Beth Cieslik, and I work in responsible sourcing and sustainability at Target. And before I get going, I should say, please stop at any time and ask questions. I think it's much more fun for both me and for you if it's more conversational. So please just chime in or whatever the best Zoom etiquette is. So yeah, I am at Target. I've been back at Target for 5 years, and I thought I would give you a little bit of context just on me and my career, and then dive into some topics related to the supply chain and COVID, if that works. And again, I'm going to speak to my experiences, many of which have been formed at Target, but these are my opinions, not Target's opinions. So just want to make sure that that's clear at the outset. So a little bit about me. I am a Minnesotan, born and raised, and have been living in the Twin Cities outside of Minneapolis with my family. I am married and I have two kids. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we have a 8-month-old Australian Labradoodle named Loki, who keeps us entertained for sure. I love to be active. I'm missing the gym in the last couple of years, but we have really active kids. We actually started the ski season yesterday with our son who's 6, so love to be outside. And we actually are one of those families that embraces the seasons in Minnesota and tries to experience all the types of weather that we have. So in my Target cart, you can always find Good and Gather raspberry hibiscus sparkling water and Good and Gather hummus. So if you are not a Target guest, I would encourage you to check it out. The Good and Gather brand is awesome. So a little bit about me and my career. I started at Target right out of undergrad and had the good fortune to kind of be in at the time, the merchandising track. So like a buyer in training. And I learned a lot in that job. My degree was in political science and social policy. And so I never really saw myself in business. But I didn't really want to practice law. And so I wanted to take a break before I thought I would go to law school. And so I was able to get a job at Target, and I learned a lot about our core business and how we put product on shelves. So I spent some time doing that, but I also learned that moving widgets around was not the best use of me or particularly exciting to me as I thought about what was next. And so really reflected on what was important to me and what I was interested in. And I knew I loved Target. And so I had the opportunity then to interview for a role in government affairs. And at the time, Target was building 150 new stores a year. And many of those stores were in communities that we had never been in before. And so they were looking for someone who understood Target and our core business, but who also had knowledge of the property development process. And I had studied social policy, and part of my work was understanding the power that local governments have, particularly as it pertains to development and big box development. And so I knew that process and I knew Target, and so was able to kind of combine those things and start my career path in a direction that has brought me a lot of fulfillment in the last 15 years. So spent some time in government affairs and really did a lot of, like I said, community engagement. I was testifying at city council meetings, helping educate people on how Target could be a different member of their community, maybe different than other big box retailers that they'd had experience with. Through that experience, I just learned that I loved the business. And so took some time to go back to business school. I went part-time while I was working at Target and held a number of positions within government affairs during that time. And then I made a transition because when I was in business school, was able to study in Scandinavia and do some research. It wasn't formally called corporate social responsibility at the time, but that's essentially what we were doing, was looking at some of the companies who do supply chain work or leverage their business for good. And so came back and wanted to parlay that experience. And I took some roles in reputation management, helping produce our corporate responsibility report and annual report. And then had the opportunity to come back to government affairs in a different role. And again, really loved the connection back to the business and wanted to be in a seat where I could kind of translate for our target businesses what was going on in a government affairs world. And so helped build out a business integration function in government affairs. And then I was looking for a new opportunity and I wanted to take on something new. I wanted to learn about a new supply chain and I wanted to be in a global setting. And so I had a great opportunity to go and be a part of the Cargill team and supported their agricultural supply chain. And again, kind of in that government affairs, public affairs space. And so I learned a lot about food and the way that we feed the world and how food is grown, particularly in the US. And I really loved the work, but culturally, it wasn't as strong of a fit for me as it had been at Target. And so when I had the opportunity to come back to Target and to work in a global setting in the supply chain space, and to be at the intersection of public policy, government, and civil society, I jumped at the chance. And so I've been back at Target for 5 years, as I said, and I've been in responsible sourcing and sustainability that whole time. And my career path isn't linear. And I just share that because I know that you're in undergrad and probably thinking about what your path will be like. And I would say for me, I got off that track at Target that was a straight line through buying and continuing up in the merchandising pyramid, which is a great path. But I really knew that for me, that intersection of all the sectors was where I felt, was the way I could have the most impact. And I think kind of transitioning from me to what we're seeing today, that intersection of culture and purpose and society is something that I'm really fascinated by. And there's been a lot of research done, and prior to COVID, even Edelman had described a shift in kind of what we see related to brands, where initially, to develop brand loyalty, it was all about brand love. And we really started before COVID to see an evolution to where our consumers wanted to be trusting a brand, not just loving a brand. And you might have experienced that shift yourselves, moving from, hey, I love H&M because they have the trendiest pieces at the best prices, to, I feel good about shopping at H&M because I know that their conscious cotton program, is certified and they report on where they are sourcing their materials from. So I think this shift is, really important to kind of just pause on for a minute. The trend was developing before COVID, but I think we're really seeing that trend evolve from trust to an expectation of transparency and a connection to the supply chain that I don't think consumers had before. And personally, I think that tie is a good thing, and that realization that there's a person at the other end of those products. We've all experienced in the last year the inability to procure your favorite product, whether that's toilet paper or, a Christmas sweater. US consumers really, post World War II generation really aren't accustomed to not being able to get the things that they want. And I think the first sort of trend or important thing that I think we'll see as an outcome of COVID is this rehumanizing of manufacturing. Certainly things are made in factories and there are machines, but there are people who are manning those machines, who are sewing on those sewing machines. And I think that connection and that realization that there's a hole, on the shelf because there are people in Vietnam who physically cannot get to a factory because everything is closed down. And I, not that I would wish for COVID, but if there's going to be a positive outcome, I think this is the big one for me, is this kind of human element, because I think it draws attention to some of the most salient human rights issues that are occurring. So not just that it's COVID, but it's about the movement and the free movement of people. It's about how much are those people being paid. And so in my most hopeful moments, I think that this connection and this rehumanization could mean a change in behavior, and that we could see consumers actually start to change their behavior, and be willing to pay more for their garments, their home goods, things like that. We often see in the consumer research that people say that they want to um, value human rights, and they think that things should cost more, that they will pay more for a premium item that has been produced in conditions that they view to be, superior. But we haven't actually ever seen that play out. And so I hope that this scenario means that there is a real conversation about fair wages and a more acknowledgement about what things should cost. So that's kind of the first big thing. And it's super weird because I'm just talking to this blank screen. So please, like I said, if you disagree, if you agree, if you have an experience, feel free to chime in. But I think that consumer trend and that acknowledgement is going to be something that's really important. Ooh, okay, new screen. Does someone have a question? No? Okay, I just get a different view. All right. I'm going to keep going. Feel free to holler at me.
Yeah, Beth, please keep going. Yeah, I think I'm checking to see if anyone has questions.
Perfect, great. Please. No, you're fine. Okay, so another trend that I think we're going to see more of, we've seen a lot of global, obviously, impact due to COVID. And a big piece of that has been, I think, focused on migrant workers. And because of the impacts globally, whether it's a Bangladeshi laborer working in a factory in Malaysia, a Vietnamese citizen who has been isolated for months because of the policy in Vietnam related to restricted movement because of the spread of COVID, or a Mexican farm worker who's in the US, I think that we're going to see less cross-border migration and just generally a decrease in economic migration. People have been, unable to get back to their families. They've been away from their home for much longer than they anticipated. And so I think there are ramifications, that takes a toll in a different way when it's one thing if you're choosing that to be able to provide for your family, but when you're unable then to get back, I think that will just see a change in the way that people look for work. I mean, we're seeing that right in the US now for what we would typically call, white collar jobs, because people are saying, I don't want to spend my life commuting. I don't want to spend my life, living in a city that my family doesn't live in. And so I think with the continued impacts of COVID, we'll continue to see that. And that has implications for the production of goods around the world. Finally, I think business models are going to shift. And that's a pretty generic statement, but I think the way that we engage in the supply chain just is going to have to be different. And so one of the big things I think we're going to see is more domestic manufacturing in the US or nearshoring. This issue of surety of supply, kind of back to the US consumer and the idea that we, readily have what we need available. I don't think that brands and retailers are going to be as open to depending on human capital that exists thousands of miles away and an ocean freight ride away. So I think you're going to see a resurgence in that focus on, US manufacturing or domestic manufacturing, depending on where the markets are. Obviously that comes with its own, subset of ramifications as well. So I think a few other things would be alongside that, you'll see the efforts around automation speeding up. We saw that again before COVID, that people were investing, trying to figure out how we can manufacture products with less human labor. I think we'll see that increase, especially in the US, because frankly, there isn't the labor force that wants to take those manufacturing jobs. And so we're going to have to figure out a different way. We can't just assume that we'll tap into a readily available labor force in the US. And so I think those efforts around automation and just different ways to manufacture a product will increase. And then finally, just the way that we engage with suppliers as brands and retailers, I think will change. There'll be fewer well, there'll need to be fewer transactional and seasonal relationships, and we'll have to think differently about how we, procure those trend items and products. So we'll have to engage in deeper, longer term relationships with key suppliers, more collaboration, more JVs, thinking about, lots of brands do kind of the factory and vendor relationship differently. And so some brands like a Nike already own, their own facilities. Target doesn't do that today. But I think you'll see just a lot more change in the retail industry related to how we engage with suppliers globally, and what those business models look like. Again, I think the themes are really just that the consumer understanding has changed. And I think that can be a really powerful thing and a really good thing. But we don't yet have the infrastructure to keep up with those changing expectations. And so it'll be important for us to think differently about how we engage throughout the supply chain.